Welcome to Class 6, the wire removal class. Here I have some footage that was an alternate take for a shot in the film called Bear by Nash Edgerton. So I'll play the shot through. So in this shot we have it all. Multiple wires over the sky, mountains, foreground bushes, the actor, and the ground. There's also a blue pad in the shot that needs to either be removed, replaced, or obscured. Then we also have to reconstruct the bicycle and actor in some areas later on in the shot. And lastly, there's lots of motion blur changes and a big and fast camera move. So let me slow this down and I'll talk you through my shot approach. So I chose a combo approach of procedural and manual methods to get this shot done. First, I'll prep my sequence and clean plate by degraining the footage, and then I'll create a clean plate of the rock to mostly obscure the blue pad here. You can see it right here in the shot, right there. And then I will paint out the wires by hand in the entire shot, and then I will comp my two elements together to see what else needs to be painted out for the ground and the bicycle and the actor, because my rock clean plate will not completely obscure the blue pad. And then I will recomp and regrain. So due to time constraints, I won't be able to paint the entire shot live in the time allotted for this class in the course. Okay, so let me briefly take you through my workflow before we dive into each step. As you can see up here, I have different sessions in my project. I chose to make separate sessions in my silhouette project so that I could compartmentalize my work and keep it more organized. So the first step I took was to degrain the shot. In this session, you can see here my degraining and my regraining tree. In this session, we will begin and end our workflow. I have already degrained the plate by using Neat Video, and I won't go into those details here as we've already covered degraining in a previous class, and I want to spend more time on the wire removal. Okay, so here we are in the screen left rock clean plate session, and let's jump right into the rock clean plate task. So while one might resort to a Digimat patch or CG element or another take of this shot without the blue pad, my goal is to complete the shot with the tools I have, which are 2D based. So to make the clean plate, I load in my degrain sequence, which is right here, and I attach a DoD node to my source, and I set the size for what I want my clean plate to be, as I know I will need an oversized plate due to the camera motion where I'm making the frame in the sequence. So here is my degrained plate, and I'm going to analyze the shot to see where should I make my clean plate from. So I'm looking for a frame where there's not too much motion blur and it's not too small or too large in frame. And I settled on frame 31 here because I felt like the frames that were before and after just had too much motion blur or distortion or just too small. So here's frame 31. And so I need to, I'll show you how I made my DoD node. And I need a DoD node, which is a domain of definition, to create an oversized canvas to paint on. So here I will select my source. I will press the tilde key in the upper left, and I will go down to the transform, and I will select the DoD. And I will bring that over here. And you can see I have a green border. I'll zoom out around my image. But I need to make this border larger so that I can have more paint on this side of my rock. So I'm going to go down to the parameters node here, and I know I want 500 extra pixels on all four sides. And while I can either just use Shift and pull out X or Y, I'm going to just reset that. I'm going to instead enter the numbers manually in the parameters box. So I'm going to click on the size here, and I know I want 500 pixels on either side, so I'm just going to up this by 1,000. Make that 2920, and I'll make this 2080. And now you can see I have my my dimensions all set. And when I'm satisfied, I'm going to click the ROI button up here in the viewer. And right here, I'm going to set the ROI to the DoD right here. And now you can see I have this area around my image where I can paint. So if I add a paint node here, paint, I bring it right here. Now I can paint on my image outside of the border. And we'll just do a quick test here. So now you can see I have this huge canvas to make a clean plate from. So now I'm going to go back to my original tree here, and I will take you through this section quickly so we can move on to the rest of the shot. So here I have my source footage, my DoD node, my clean plate. So you can see I've painted this here. And it's a little bit challenging because I didn't have a lot to pull from, either the same frame or maybe I was trying to use other frames to pull from. And then if I wasn't getting enough definition, I like to use the dodge and the burn tools, and that lets me create some contours in a rock that if I didn't have actual source material to pull from. And then after I'm satisfied with my paint, I need to put a hold frame underneath the clean plate. So I entered a hold node here, and I put my frame that I wanted to hold on, which is 44631. If you see that, that's I can just edit that here. 44631. And then if I painted in the alpha, I just like to make sure that I set that to black. And then now I have to make a roto for my shape. So when I painted, I wasn't too worried. I'll zoom in here about what my edges were going to look like because I'm going to let my roto define those edges. So I've just made one frame roto on this frame here, the hero frame, and then next we're going to do the tracking. So I turned to the Mocha Pro plugin for this task as it has a couple more features that can assist me in assessing and creating a better track as opposed to using the integrated Mocha tracker inside of the silhouette tracking module. I can set my surface tool and keep an eye on the grid. So let's just launch this right now and I'll show you what I did. Okay, so now you can see here that I have, here's my track of the blue pad. And even though that my track failed at the end, you can see there wasn't able to complete it at the beginning. That's okay. I could have done some more tracking inside of Mocha, but I've decided that I'm going to manually make some edits, some transform edits back in Silhouette so that I can kind of see visually where my clean plate is moving and just make those keyframes with another transform node. So just to show you how I did my tracking here, I will just turn off my existing track and I'll make a new layer here to track with. So I'm just making a general shape around the blue pad. And then I'm going to set my surface tool here. And this is going to give me an idea of the area that I'm trying to track. And I'm going to turn on the grid. And I'm just going to try to match the angle and the perspective a little bit. So I do not have the surface tool or the grid inside of the integrated Mocha tracking inside of Silhouette. So here I find it helpful just to set that here. And yeah. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to turn that off and I'm going to do some tracking. And I've just, I've clicked translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. I'm going to up the pixels. And then I'm going to turn off warp spline. I don't need that. And I'm going to track forward. That's going to fail at some point. So I'll stop that. And then I can always go to the dope sheet and just delete the keyframes I don't want. So I like it till about here, and then I'm just going to select these and delete those. And then we'll go back to the parameters, go back to my keyframe, and I will track backwards. And then it terminated on its own. And I'll just kind of scroll and make sure, do I want to use that? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so then I'm going to, I'll show you how I exported my track. So I'm selected on my layer here, and of course I can just label that blue pad 2. And then I export the track here, and I'm going to select the silhouette corner pin, copy to clipboard, and then I'm saving and closing out. And then, so here I can make a tracker node. You can either do this here or you can do this inside a different session. So here's my tracker node. I'm going to just paste that. So Command V. And now you can see I have my corner pin trackings inside of the tracker window here. I'm going to create a new layer by clicking the plus button here. I'm going to call this blue pad track layer. Then I'm going to select all the corner pins and the layer, and I'm going to go to the point tracker tab here. I'm going to click apply, and it says corner pin tracking applied to the active layer. So now I have my track inside of this layer. So now I need to get this tracking information back into a different session, into my comping session. So there's a couple ways you can do that. So I can either copy the information here inside the tracker node, or I can just copy the tracker node itself. So if I Command C, and then I go back to my screen left rock clean plate, I'll just paste it over on the side. Command V, and now you can see I have my tracking information already in here. So I've already done that previously. So I have my screen left tracker here. I'll just turn on my BG. So there's my tracker. And then I want to pipe this into a transform node. So this tracker will drive this transform node here. So now you can see that in my tracking node, I've called this new track. And I've selected in the transform pull down, new track. So now it knows which tracking information to use. And then here you can see I have made a couple transform edits, and this has just helped me kind of animate my clean plate on and off when I didn't have that tracking information that in Mocha. Okay, so now let's see what that looks like all together. So I'm going to click on this part of the tree, and we'll go to a frame where it will make some sense. First, I'm going to reset the DoD here. Reset. Zoom out. Okay. So now you can see I have my clean plate inside of my shot. So I know this is working how I want it to work, and we're going to move on to the wire removal soon. But the last thing I want to show you is that when you're using tracking data from pasted into your tree, you're not sure if you're getting the correct motion blur, and that's a little bit hard with just a 2D. A 2D fix is what we're doing here, but I can edit some information inside of the transform node to give me a little bit more directional motion blur. Okay, so I can do that by going into the transform screen left rock node here, double clicking on that, and I'm just going to pop this out real quick. And you can see over here, we have the shutter angle and the shutter phase. So I found that I had to try to mimic some of the motion blur in the plate, and it's kind of hard, like I said, with a 2D solution. But by editing these motion blur settings in the transform node, I could do that. So, and the reason why is like when I track features in the motion blurred BG footage, I want to track the center of any objects that the tracker finds. And when I render out my paint, I want the motion blur to match. So the default motion blur setting in Silhouette is to start the blur at the current frame and extend halfway into the next frame. But I really want the blur centered around the current frame. So I adjust the settings to move half of the 180-degree shutter before the current frame and the other half after the current frame. So that's why I have my shutter angle set to 80 and my phase to a negative 40. So that is different from the default settings in the motion blur transform node. So I would just play around with that if you're finding that you can't get the default motion blur to look correct. So I'll just pop that back in. Okay, so now that I have my tracking done for my clean plate and inside my comp here, and I've done my last bit of transform edits, I maybe added a little more detail. It's kind of like sharpening, but it's this different way of adding some sharpening, and I found I like that. Then I can see where I'm at. So you can see here I've had my wire removal already inside here, so this is painted out. But what really we're looking at is when I'm going to do my hand paint next, you can see that I have to paint out the wires, but I also have to paint out some sections here where my clean plate does not cover the background or the actor or the bike. So that's going to be some painting of the background and some reconstructing of this actor where I don't have any information to pull from. Okay, so next we will move on to the wire paint. But I just want to point out one more thing here is that you can rename your nodes here. So for example, like this is typically just a hold frame, but I can add like which frame I wanted to hold. And I just kind of put the last couple numbers because that's just less to be confused about. And then here I've just added what these tracker nodes actually are. It's my screen left rock and then my edits here. So I just know which node is holding what. Here's my screen left roto. And it just keeps it all organized because before you know it, your tree can get pretty lengthy and it's easy to be organized by just doing some labeling. Okay, I'm going to wrap up this portion of the wire removal shot right here and continue on in class 7 where we will work on paint and shot finishing.